Lord of Mysteries. My Identities echoes across time chapter 11 to 20. Who's this? Reinforcements from the church. Klein was a bit confused but mostly relieved. The youth's actions and words suggested he was an ally. It's you. Leonard immediately recognized the youth they had seen yesterday at St. Selena Church. He exclaimed in shock, almost without thinking, You really are an angel of the church. What? For a moment, Klein doubted if he was hallucinating from blood loss. Dunn, who was not far away, was equally surprised and looked towards the youth. Not bad, my poet friend. It wasn't in vain that I played the Riddler yesterday. Lynn was quite satisfied with this. Always enjoying a bit of fun, he smiled at Leonard and said, Wrong guess, I'm not one of your church members. But don't worry, I'm not an enemy. As Lynn spoke, a flute appeared in his hand, and his attire changed slightly. A beautiful low sound emerged from the flute. With the flute's sound, the true creator's offspring, which had decided to descend at all costs due to the fiery spear, suddenly fell silent. Mystical reenactment. Piper of Hamelin. A spell with a special effect on children, forcibly calming and hypnotizing them. After subduing the true creator's offspring, the flute in Lynn's hand dissipated. He raised his hand toward Megos and the true creator's offspring, and over a dozen flaming spears condensed. As his hand dropped, the spears shot towards them. Boom! The golden-red flames illuminated the entire room again. The high temperature that could cause burns didn't affect anyone in the room except Megos and the true creator's offspring. After the flames extinguished, a burning, curled umbilical cord fell from midair. It was the remains of the true creator's offspring, an extraordinary characteristic transformed into a sealed artifact. Lynn watched the umbilical cord, walked over, and picked it up. For a moment, filthy murmurs appeared in his ears, but for him in an external plug-in state, these murmurs were insignificant. It's resolved. Klein genuinely sighed in relief. He looked at Lynn, who remained calm and elegant as if resolving the true creator's offspring was just a trivial task for him. If he really is an angel, that would indeed be the case. Klein mused. Though filled with curiosity about Lynn, he cautiously decided not to speak rashly to avoid mistakes. Although I don't know who you are, please allow me to express my gratitude. You saved us in the city. Dunn, as the leader of the Nighthawks, couldn't remain silent. He carefully chose his words and spoke solemnly. It was just a small effort. Besides, I got what I wanted. Lynn smiled warmly. Suddenly, he looked at Klein with a somewhat playful expression and said, Of course, if you need to give me a codename, I'm Batman. What? Klein almost lost control of his expression. He looked at Lynn, and the term, Batman, echoed in his mind, not in Loan language, but in broken English. Could he also be? Klein immediately had a guess. He saw the young man wink at him a few steps away. The other party said in his mind, Be bold, remove the could, it's just as you think. Honestly, Klein was absolutely stunned. It was one thing to have a fellow transmigrator, but this fellow even knew about him. No, I can't be so sure, maybe he's just tricking me. Klein swallowed nervously, still holding on to a sliver of hope. The young man continued, I know you have many questions, about this world, about yourself. Hearing this, Klein could no longer deceive himself. Fortunately, he had a strong heart and quickly calmed down. He couldn't help but ask in his mind, You know. Though he didn't finish his question, the meaning was clear, Do you know why I transmigrated? Why am I in this world? Lynn didn't answer Klein's question directly. Instead, he changed the topic. Zangwill's corpse is in the house at 29 of this street. There, you'll find the truth about everything you've been experiencing lately. Upon hearing this, Dunn's expression turned serious. He said in a deep voice, I understand, I'll handle it. Thank you for your help. Lynn accepted the thanks calmly. Through corner of his gray eyes, he looked at Klein, and he sighed. You're too weak now. Klein was taken aback by the voice on his mind. While various guesses flashed through his mind, he asked, What do you mean? If I become stronger, will you answer my questions? You could think of it that way. Klein could see the other figure nodding in his mind, not denying his words. Lynn then snapped his fingers, and his body dissipated like mist. But if we meet again, I can answer some of your questions in advance. Goodbye, little seer. You're welcome to find me in Backland. It only took couple of seconds to end their conversation. With a puff, Lynn's figure completely disappeared, so quickly that Klein couldn't react. He instinctively opened his mouth but closed it again. His mind was in chaos due to Lynn's words. This wasn't surprising, considering the enormous amount of information Klein received in such a short time. After Lynn left, Dunn breathed a sigh of relief and immediately headed towards the Chinese gate. He hadn't forgotten that without the suppression of St. Selena's ashes, the sealed artifacts in the Chinese gate were being guarded by other Nighthawks. He needed to get there to prevent unnecessary casualties. Klein and Leonard quickly followed. Though their minds were in chaos, they knew the importance of the matter at hand. A few minutes later, hurried footsteps echoed as members of the mandated Punishers and Machinery Hivemind squads rushed into the almost ruined house. 008, give me therapy. Almost as soon as he returned to his residence, Lynn ended his external plug-in state. He took out 008 from his pocket and wrote in the prepared notebook. Despite the unknown influence causing a spillover of divinity, Lynn maintained his humanity and overcame the influence of divinity. This is the judgment of the best psychologist in the world. End of chapter. TN. He nicknamed himself Red Scarf. I didn't like the implications of that and didn't understand the joke anyway, so I changed it. Mystical reenactment. Piper of Hamelin refers to the legend of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. The Pied Piper of Hamelin is a folklore tale where a piper, dressed in multicolored pied clothing, used his magical pipe to lure rats away from the town of Hamelin. When the townspeople refused to pay him for his services, he used the pipe to lead the children away as well, and they mysteriously disappeared. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Sure enough, Lynn has many secrets, but the Quill of Alzuhad doesn't care about that. It only cares about when Lynn will fulfill the promise. The last sentence was not written by Lynn himself but by the pen itself. In response, Lynn, who had already felt the effects of treatment from 008, blinked, recalling what had happened before. Regarding the battle with Ince Zangwill, Lynn didn't spend much time on it. After all, at this moment, Ince was just a Sequence 5, even though he held the artifact 008, he would only be as easy for Lynn to deal with as squishing an ant in a face-to-face battle. The reason Lynn arrived at the Blackthorn Security Company so late was mainly because he spent time convincing 008. As a top sealed object with consciousness, if 008 didn't want to cooperate, even if Lynn could forcibly take it away with the aid of external forces, he would only get a ticking time bomb. So Lynn spent some time painting a rosy picture for 008, using 008's love for scriptwriting and his own understanding of the plot to describe some scripts that could excite 008 and appropriately bring up a certain priest as a threat. Eventually, he successfully reached a superficial agreement with 008. Of course, Lynn knew very well that 008, a pen made entirely of contrary bones, would not truly submit to him. It was probably plotting to kill him every moment. But it didn't matter, because Lynn didn't offer all bait to 008. So, until those cravings were satisfied, 008 would still be useful to him to some extent, which was enough. Even if it didn't work out, he could just switch to a bigger one, pay some price, and then go half mad. Therefore, facing 008's questioning, Lynn just looked at the quill calmly and said with a smile, "Don't be impatient, Quill of Alzuhad, to plot against a god, one must have enough patience. But before that, we can practice a bit, like targeting the Demoness's divine descent container, the Augustus who attempts to ascend to the throne of the Black Emperor. What do you think?" 008 paused, and the pen tip in contact with the notebook wrote, "It seems that you really know a lot. Oh, people like you with many secrets are really suitable to be the protagonist under my pen." Undoubtedly, this was 008's dissatisfaction warning, including some sincere words to a certain extent. As an avenue for high-sequence sealed objects, 008 naturally couldn't fail to see through Lynn's bluff. "Don't say that, I'm not interested in being featured in your script." Lynn remained calm, saying, "Otherwise, I'll have to hand you over to that one, I don't even know which step his ritual has reached. Lynn used the card Adam is behind you. JPG. 008 fell silent, and a few seconds later, the feather pen wrote. I hope you're not like Ince Zangwill, a third-rate writer. I've had enough of his stiff coincidences. Letting such a person write a script is simply a stain on me. Obviously, 008 chose to compromise. It was just a sealed object after all. If Lynn were really an ordinary Sequence 9, 008 would definitely have crushed him to death and happily let him take the blame in the script, then find the next owner. Unfortunately, Lynn was not, so even with a rebellious 008, it chose to temporarily compromise. As for whether it would secretly write a script to kill Lynn later. Do I even need to say? Of course, it would. Well, I hope I'm not either. Lynn, who was very clear about 008's temperament, pretended to blush shyly. After all, Lynn actually knew very well that if he really wrote a script, his level might not be much higher than Ince's. 008, so why couldn't it meet someone who was really good at writing scripts? 008 felt somewhat depressed, as if he had already seen his future being stained. Having dealt with 008, Lynn stretched lazily, and then began to review what had just happened. The battle itself didn't need to be mentioned, it was just a small game for cheating players. The key was what he said to Klein. Lynn deliberately exposed his identity as a transmigrator in front of Klein. On the one hand, since he was incognito, what did it matter to him, a Sequence 9 newbie, what a sage did? On the other hand, Lynn intended to use the identity of a fellow transmigrator to increase his presence in Klein's eyes, lay the groundwork for future investment and alliance, and provide Klein with some new motivation. After all, Ince, the early boss that motivated Klein to work hard for promotion, had been dealt with by Lynn in advance. In this case, in order to ensure that the Lordofthemysteries could still be born, and to ensure that he wouldn't be thrown out from the Earth in the future, Lynn naturally planned to make up for it. For Klein, who was longing to return home, what could bring more motivation than news related to transmigration and hometown? Of course, Lynn didn't deny that there was some malicious fun in saying these things. As for Klein not leaving the Evernight Church to go to Backland, Lynn wasn't worried about that. As the #1 cat raiser, the Evernight goddess cared more about Klein's growth than he did. Tingen was just a newbie village for Klein to adapt to life after transmigration. Through the follow-up of this incident, Lynn could also roughly grasp the attitude of the Evernight goddess towards him, so as to determine the subsequent arrangements, which could be described as killing two birds with one stone. In any case, with 008 in hand, I don't need to be stuck in this cave anymore. In the second epic's cave, Lynn opened his eyes, and a series of exploration plans emerged in his mind. He then glanced around and found that during the short time he had been distracted, a certain mythological creature had disappeared. This made Lynn stunned for a moment. Just as he was about to go to the entrance of the cave to look for him, he heard a loud roar. Roar. It seemed to be some kind of giant beast, which inexplicably made Lynn think of a dragon from myth. Wait, a dragon. Lynn suddenly realized something and rushed towards the entrance of the cave. Just as he arrived, he saw a figure flying over. It was none other than the child state of Medici. Lynn flashed and caught Medici, who was about to hit the mountain wall. Medici looked extremely miserable, obviously being beaten up badly in the short time just now. However, Lynn didn't have time to heal Medici. He immediately looked out of the cave and saw a dragon that covered the sky and sun. Although he didn't feel any fear, he couldn't help but sigh. Obviously, I've been so careful to avoid thinking about your name, basically using 008 as a substitute, yet you still sensed it. This ability to know everything through connection is really annoying. Yes, at this moment, outside the cave, the dragon that attacked Medici was indeed a Sequence 1 dragon. And in this era, there was only one such existence, Alzuhad, the Nightmare Dragon. The nominal son of Dragon of Imagination Anquelt and his actual incarnation. End of chapter. Lynn admitted that he had underestimated the high sequence abilities of the spectator pathway. It wasn't that he forgot the Dragon of Nightmares, Alzuhad, became a sealed artifact at the end of the second epic, but in his pursuit of 008, Lynn had to think about 008 in this timeline. To avoid detection by the Dragon of Nightmares, Alzuhad, and the Dragon of Imagination, Anquilt, Lynn had deliberately avoided directly thinking of their names, using 008 as a substitute. However, Lynn didn't expect that even under such circumstances, the Dragon of Nightmares, Alzuhad, would still find him. It must have been when I first transmigrated here and hadn't realized I was in the second epoch. My thoughts about the quill of Alzuhad were detected. Lynn reflected on his recent actions and realized that Alzuhad's ability to sense him likely stemmed from those early moments after his transmigration, when he wasn't cautious enough. After all, under normal circumstances, even if Adam or Hermes sensed someone mentioning their names, as long as there was no malice, they wouldn't trouble that person. At most, they'd mark them for special attention. The Dragon of Nightmares, Alzuhad, was a special case. Though many thoughts ran through his mind, in reality, only a moment had passed. Lynn still had time to make a calm judgment, but if the real Dragon of Nightmares, Alzuhad, had come, Medici and I would already be dead. The Spectator Pathway's unique incarnations were different from those of the Marauder Pathway. Before activation, they could essentially be seen as independent entities. It was clear that the Dragon of Nightmares, Alzuhad, had come alone after sensing Lynn. Alzuhad certainly had the capability. The gap between Sequence 1 and Sequence 2 was significant, and both Lynn and Medici were newborn mythical creatures. Their potion digestion progress was negligible, essentially zero, and even if they fought together, it would be hard to defeat the seasoned Sequence 1, Alzuhad. The path before Lynn was undoubtedly binary, fight or flee. But before making a decision, there's one more thing to figure out. Lynn scanned his surroundings with a scrutinizing gaze. Since it was the Dragon of Nightmares, Alzuhad, was this still reality? Had he already been pulled into a nightmare? Or had the nightmare silently engulfed this part of reality? As he considered this, Lynn suddenly noticed Medici was gone, replaced by a grotesque, gigantic tumor. The environment around him also seemed to change in an instant. The sky grew dim, and everywhere Lynn looked, there were disgusting tumors and bizarre plants. Wow! Lynn raised an eyebrow, making a dispassionate remark, having made his judgment. A dream within a dream. His opponent was drawing him deeper into successive layers of dream. How many layers deep was this dream? Medici didn't know. He didn't know when he had been pulled into the nightmare by the unknown enemy. By the time Medici realized he was in a dream, he had already fought many exhausting battles. Each awakening was merely the start of the next nightmare. Despite his efforts to save himself, he only sank deeper. Medici understood that the enemy did not want to kill him immediately but seemed to enjoy toying with him. Is this all? Having slain another attacking monster, Medici, weak and leaning on a sword made of flames, sneered. Even though it was just a few simple words, his tone and expression were fully taunting. However, the Dragon of Nightmares, Alzuhad, as a high-ranking spectator, had excellent self-control and did not react to Medici's provocation. Ads by PubFuture. This made Medici purse his lips and continue his taunting while ceaselessly thinking of a way to break free. Just as Medici's insults continued for about 3 minutes, the ground under him suddenly shook. Initially wary of another high-fall scenario, he noticed the sky splitting open. And the nightmare, was it collapsing? How could that be? Medici was both astonished and cautious, suspecting another trap, yet he peered towards the collapsing part of the nightmare. Why not continue? I thought you wanted to delve into the deepest part of my dream. In another dream, compared to Medici's disarray, Lynn appeared composed. His indifferent eyes gazed at the void where nightmare creatures had once been, now replaced by emptiness. Everything was vanishing except for Lynn and the enormous dragon in front of him. My intuition tells me that continuing deeper into your dream will lead to dreadful consequences. Alzuhad spoke calmly, his voice devoid of madness. In fact, Alzuhad felt quite frustrated. Crushing 2 Sequence 2s was challenging, but these were just mythical creature infants. Actually killing them shouldn't have been difficult. Yet, one of these creatures proved exceedingly resilient, taunting Alzuhad with infuriating remarks. The other initially seemed normal, but as Alzuhad drew him into a deeper, near-mental island dream, everything changed. The mythical infant took on a new persona, seizing half the control of the dream in an instant. Horrified, Al-Zuhad became even more determined to eliminate this foe. That I can't quite understand. Lynn chuckled. He recognized his current state was unusual, perhaps due to prolonged use of his Smurf account or other reasons, but he wasn't particularly concerned. Lynn had only one thought now: to kill the reptile before him. The dragon would make a fine writing instrument. As he entertained this thought, countless pieces of knowledge about the Dragon of Nightmares, Al-Zuhad, flashed in Lynn's eyes. And the source of this information? Well, wasn't it obvious at a glance? Lynn chuckled again, finding no issue with it. The world, after all, was just as clearly defined as data. End of chapter. The next second, the nightmare finally shattered completely. Lynn found himself back at the familiar cave entrance. Nearby, Medici tumbled out of the void and fell to the ground in a sorry state. "Hey, Red, you're really a mess." Lynn looked at the struggling Medici and drew out his words, though his eyes showed no emotion. "You," Medici almost instinctively wanted to retort, but swallowed his words back. His biological instincts told him that Lynn was very dangerous at this moment. "Good boy." Lynn patted Medici on the head. Seeing him behave so meekly, he wiped the dust off his hand on Medici's clothes, then looked at the distant dragon and smiled. "Why run? A guest shouldn't leave without the host's permission." He raised his hand and snapped his fingers lightly. Snap. With a crisp sound, time in this area seemed to freeze. The dragon previously suspended in midair vanished, replaced by another dragon that had been pulled back, revealing that the airborne dragon had been merely an illusion left by the Dragon of Nightmares, Al-Zuhad. While Al-Zuhad could fool others, he clearly could not deceive the present Lynn. The setting sun stained the sky blood red. On the nearly flattened mountain peak, the once sky-covering dragon lay lifeless. There were no wounds on its body, only the marks left by the passage of time, as if it had lived through indescribable ages in an instant. Time had taken everything from it, including its life. A child, appearing no more than 7 or 8 years old, sat on the dragon's drooping wings, swinging his legs and playing with what looked like a quill. He seemed both leisurely and carefree, with the arrogance of a god and the innocence of a child simultaneously showing on him, giving him a mysterious and contradictory aura. Next to him, a red-haired, red-eyed boy who had lost his usual brashness and sarcastic attitude, sat obediently, appearing completely subdued. This was the scene that greeted the ancient sun god upon his arrival. Sensing the battle here, the ancient sun god stopped and observed the scene. His gaze first swept over the corpse of the Dragon of Nightmares, Al-Zuhad, on the ground, then turned to the child on the ancient wings. At this moment, the latter also noticed the ancient sun god, his silver eyes glancing over. In an instant, the ancient sun god seemed to see countless brilliant illusions. At this moment, a phrase appeared in his mind: "Do not disturb, do not probe." Without time to ponder the phrase, the ancient sun god immediately closed his eyes and turned his head. Lynn looked coldly at the ancient sun god in the distance. Seeing him, he instinctively knew who he was and saw the essence closely connected to the ancient sun god. The Sea of Chaos, one of the world's pillars and anchors. An anchor? Wait, an anchor. Lynn's rational mind momentarily stalled, as if a fog was being lifted. He blinked, and the silver in his eyes began to fade. The world around Lynn returned to its original state, no longer appearing as mere data. He lost the power to see through everything, and the emotions that seemed stripped away before suddenly returned. Lynn looked down, memories of the recent events flooding his mind, leaving him momentarily stunned. What did I do? I killed the Dragon of Nightmares, Al-Zuhad. No, I don't have that kind of power. Those sudden abilities. Lynn felt confused. He remembered clearly how he had brutally beaten the Dragon of Nightmares, Al-Zuhad. Precisely because of this, Lynn was even more shocked. He had no memory of possessing such terrifying abilities and felt estranged from his actions. That was him, yet it didn't feel like him. It was as if some great existence had awakened within him in that moment. Although the entity hadn't taken over his body, Lynn had inevitably been influenced by borrowing its power. Ads by PubFuture. This wasn't intentional on the part of the entity, but a natural outcome. As if they were inherently one. Lynn suddenly felt a chill, not because of the assimilation, but because he found himself not strongly resisting the idea of being assimilated. No, this isn't my will. This is my instinct. Lynn pressed his lips together. He didn't know what was happening or who that great entity was, but he didn't want to become part of it. Perhaps, before his transmigration, he might have accepted it, but now Lynn did not want his existence as Lynn to be erased without a trace. He wasn't afraid of death, but he couldn't accept such an outcome. Even if the end was inevitable, Lynn wanted to leave something of himself behind, to prove he existed. Maybe there's a reason I was locked up in that underground base for so many years. Perhaps I am part of some evil god. Lynn thought wryly. He suddenly recalled the golden finger he got after transmigrating. He once thought it was a perk of transmigration, but now it seemed it might be a power associated with his unique identity. But when I use my Smurf account, apart from the divine nature influence, I don't feel this assimilation. Why? Lynn fell into deep thought. If I consider myself as an avatar of some big shot, could my Smurf account ability be an inherent ability given to me when I was split off? And the power just now was borrowed from the main body, so one has no influence and the other does. Because this part of the power can be considered mine, like my consciousness and my soul. They might originally come from that big shot, but now they belong to me. At least until the big shot takes them back, they belong to me. Lynn thought this hypothesis was very likely. His Smurf account ability might be like the inheritance given by the main body. Since it was given to him, using it wouldn't make him gravitate towards the main body. Who are you? While Lynn was deep in thought, he suddenly heard Medici's voice and saw a figure blocking in front of him. It was Medici. Lynn was stunned for a moment. Then he looked up and saw the ancient sun god, who had opened his eyes and taken a few steps towards them. Medici had bristled and was also on guard. After all, this child had just gone through a fierce battle and witnessed Lynn's terrifying transformation, so he was in a sensitive period. I mean no harm. End of chapter. I mean no harm. The ancient sun god stopped in his tracks and even took half a step back, speaking in a gentle tone. Perhaps you need some assistance. Upon hearing this, Medici paused. Ever vigilant, he did not immediately trust the ancient sun god, watching him warily. Lynn, however, recalled something else. The power of the mystery prior pathway was clearly different from what power he borrowed. So, if he used this world's meander paths to become stronger, could he reach sequence 0 or even in Great Old One and resist that entity? Even if he couldn't resist, as long as he could maintain his independence or break away from that being, it would be enough for Lynn. Lynn had a feeling that the entity didn't care if he broke away. Just as it hadn't actively reclaimed him, everything depended on himself. And if he wanted to ascend, following the ancient sun god was undoubtedly the best choice now. With this in mind, Lynn pulled Medici, patting his head reassuringly, and then looked at the ancient sun god, smiling. You're right, we do need some help. Perhaps you wouldn't mind taking in 2 homeless mythological creatures. While Lynn successfully hitched a ride with the ancient sun god, in the 5th epic, Loan Kingdom, Awa County, Tingen City, beneath the St. Selena Cathedral, in the watch room outside the Chinese Gate. The small watch room was bustling with activity. Strong beyonders from the cathedral were resealing the Chinese Gate to prevent any mishaps. Fortunately, St. Selena's ashes had not been stolen, so the problem wasn't too severe. Dunn, Leonard, and Klein each found a chair in the watch room. Before them was a powerful meander from the cathedral, understanding the details of the recent incident involving the true creator's offspring. So, from the current situation, it seems that the incident started when the traitor Ince Zangwil, who stole 008, tried to seize St. Selena's ashes, triggering a series of events. The cathedral's strong meander flipped through his notebook, recording while speaking. But there was an existence suspected to be an angel. He paused, glancing at Leonard, confirming, "Are you sure it was an angel?" Yes, that being admitted it themselves. Leonard, usually laid back, nodded earnestly. As the only one present who had interacted with Lynn twice, he was naturally the key subject of questioning. Seeing Leonard nod, the cathedral's meander, though internally shocked, managed to calm his emotions and continued. An unknown angel appeared to stop all this, killing Ince Zangwil and preventing the birth of the evil god's offspring, taking 008 and the remnants. He paused again, looking at Klein to confirm, and this being also mentioned that you should go to Backlund to find them, correct? Yes. Klein didn't deny it, though he was worried this might cause trouble. This matter was too significant to hide. Since Klein indeed didn't know Lynn, he was relatively calm, choosing his words carefully, but I had never seen that angel before today. All right. The cathedral Beander nodded, confirming various details from the three of them before saying, this matter is too significant. We will send a telegram to report this to the Pope, and the subsequent handling will need their orders. But don't worry, you are all heroes of Tingen. The Beander smiled at Klein and his colleagues. Even though an unknown angel intervened, if not for your bravery in the critical moment, delaying the birth of the evil god's offspring, many people might have died by the time the angel acted. The church will remember your merits. He paused, then continued smiling. If any of you feel ready to apply for a promotion, now would be a good time. Your contributions are sufficient, and we never shortchange our heroes. You flatter us. Dunn, not one to be swayed by praise, remained composed. As for promotion, I think I need more time to hone myself. Although he had grasped the acting method, Dunn had recently ingested Kenley's characteristics, so he truly couldn't advance yet. I think I'm about ready to ascend to Sequence 7. After hesitating, Leonard spoke up. Despite avoiding the original tragic fate, the recent incident gave him a strong sense of urgency. Leonard couldn't imagine what might have happened without the unknown angel's intervention. This led to a simple thought: if only I were stronger. Ads by PubFuture. Strong enough to not feel so helpless next time. So, despite his lazy nature, Leonard felt the urge to advance. With an old grandpa's guidance, he had effectively understood the acting method, almost fully digesting his Midnight Poet potion. Klein, on the other hand, shook his head. I still need some time before I can advance. His clown potion digestion wasn't far along, so he couldn't advance yet. The cathedral Beander nodded slightly. No need to rush. Your merits won't fade over time. Even if you can't apply now, you can do so when the time is right. I will. Thank you. Klein and Dunn spoke in unison. The Beander then closed his notebook. It's getting late. You've had a long day. Get some rest. I'll notify you if needed. All right. The three, indeed exhausted, left the Blackthorn Security Company. The cathedral's Beander began telegraphing the gathered information to headquarters. Iron Cross Street. Melissa sat on a single-seater, holding 3 tickets to The Return of the Count. Not long ago, she had arranged with Klein and Benson to watch the play tonight. For the Moretti family, who once struggled for basic needs, this was unprecedented luxury, marking a new beginning for them. They were finally heading towards a better life. Thus, even though Melissa could recite the text on the tickets, she tirelessly examined them, repeatedly checking the printed date and seat numbers. As the eldest brother of the Moretti family, Benson, though not scrutinizing the tickets like Melissa, watched his focused sister with a gentle smile, clearly looking forward to their family time. Suddenly, they heard the doorbell ring. Ding dong, ding dong. End of chapter. Melissa paused, first glancing at the maid busy in the kitchen, then looking puzzled towards the door. Then, Melissa ran to open the door, seeing Klein standing there. Her eyes lit up instantly, but then she exclaimed in shock, "Klein, your chest. What happened? Are you hurt? I'll get the medicine." "No, we need to go to the hospital, right now." Usually mature and calm, Melissa was completely panicked because she saw that Klein's chest had a large tear as if cut by a knife. Although she couldn't see the deeper wound, she could see the coagulated blood on the surface of his clothes, which made her imagine many bad things. I'm fine, Melissa, this isn't my blood," Klein said, stunned for a moment, then remembered his chest injury. It's not surprising that Klein forgot. After his chest wound was healed, he was immediately overwhelmed by a huge amount of information. Then he went to support the guarding of the Chinese gate, followed by entertaining the strong individuals from the cathedral and answering their inquiries. With this series of events, Klein had indeed been so busy that he forgot to take care of his clothes. Fortunately, the wound had already healed. Klein thought for a moment and found a reason for his clothes, claiming that the blood belonged to a victim he saved, and his clothes were torn in the process of being a good Samaritan. In a way, this was true. By the way, the person I saved was very grateful and gave me some compensation, about £50. Having long wanted to find an opportunity to improve the family's conditions and give them some money, Klein took this chance to say, I think we can use this money to buy some things. For example, Melissa, you could use a new dress. You have too few dresses. No, Klein, I already have a new dress, I don't need more. You should save that money. Melissa shook her head, showing a disapproving look. Then she bit her lip, looked at the torn clothes on Klein's chest again, hesitated, and said, Klein, I'm not saying what you did was wrong. Helping others is good, and I'm proud to have a brother like you, but, if something like this happens again, I hope you can protect yourself first. Melissa said seriously, looking into Klein's eyes. Beside them, Benson also spoke up, Klein, we are not trying to stop your good deeds. It's just that, no matter what, we want you to remember that we are waiting for you to come home. Klein was stunned. He looked at Benson and Melissa in front of him, opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but didn't know what to say. In the end, he just nodded heavily, showing a bright smile. I will. While the Moretti family was enjoying a warm moment watching a play together, in the second epic, when the ancient sun god returned to the base with the two little ones, the atmosphere was strange. A tall, rugged-looking man with dark blue hair and a somewhat casual outfit leaned against a wine table. His gaze fell on the two little ones beside the ancient sun god, showing a clearly surprised expression. In a slightly more distant spot from the blue-haired man sat another person, a man dressed in a highly ostentatious manner, shining with gold. If it weren't for the fact that they were indoors, one might suspect they would be blinded by the gold accessories on him. Unlike the obvious surprise of the blue-haired man, the golden man was clearly better at hiding his emotions, only discreetly scrutinizing Lynn and Medici with an appraising look. Behind them, clad in a simple linen robe with silver-white long hair, a beautiful face, and soft features, Ouroboros was holding a paintbrush, apparently painting something originally. However, upon seeing the ancient sun god bring back two little ones, even the typically slow-reacting Ouroboros paused his painting. He quietly stared at Lynn and Medici for a few seconds, finally revealing an expression of sudden realization, saying, Master, is this the interesting thing you mentioned before? What? Upon hearing this, Lynn raised an eyebrow and glanced at the ancient sun god. Good heavens, they had noticed him a long time ago. No wonder they appeared so coincidentally. Is this what it means to be a big shot? Medici also looked at the ancient sun god thoughtfully. Ads by PubFuture. Under everyone's gaze, the ancient sun god remained calm, showing a gentle smile. After nodding slightly to Ouroboros, he introduced, this is Lynn and Medici. They are sequence 2, a sage and a weather warlock respectively, and will be living with us from now on. He then looked at Lynn and Medici, introducing them in turn. The blue-haired one is Leodoro, a calamity of the tyrant pathway. Although he looks fierce and is indeed often in a bad mood, his temperament isn't bad, just a bit quick-tempered. At this point, the ancient sun god paused, glancing at Leodoro with some hesitation, but continued, Leodoro likes to sing, but his singing has a unique aesthetic. So, if he wants to practice singing, it's better to avoid him, as everyone's tastes might differ. Hearing this, Leodoro's expression instantly stiffened but did not refute anything, only turning his head slightly and muttering something. Since everyone present wasn't ordinary, they could hear him muttering words like, you just don't appreciate it, and, rugged beauty. Do you know what rugged beauty is? Everyone tacitly pretended not to hear. After all, they genuinely couldn't appreciate Leodoro's singing. Low EQ. Singing is terrible. High EQ. A unique aesthetic. Lynn almost couldn't help but laugh out loud. Although he had guessed the blue-haired man was Leodoro, he didn't expect the latter to have the same tone-deaf attribute as the hanged man. No, it should be said that the hanged man Alger's tone-deaf attribute was inherited. However, considering future good colleague relationships, Lynn held back and took the initiative to say, hello, Mr. Leodoro. Please take care of us in the future. Next to him, Medici seemed eager to challenge, clearly wanting to provoke a bit. But before he could do something reckless, Lynn quickly stepped on Medici's foot, drawing attention to himself. He calmly accepted Medici's glare, still wearing a seemingly harmless and friendly smile. Smiling like that, Leodoro looked at Lynn's smile with a peculiar expression for a moment, but then he waved his hand and said, "Just call me Leodoro. If you have any fighting business, you can find me. And, you can also find me for drinking," Leodoro added. "End of this chapter." "I will," Lynn nodded. "TCH. Medici pursed his lips but secretly glanced at Leodoro. Clearly, Medici's series of actions weren't entirely reckless, he had his own considerations. "Behave yourself, I don't want you getting beaten to death tomorrow," Lynn whispered to Medici. He could see what Medici intended, but he also knew that regardless of Medici's considerations, his provocative behavior could easily offend others. Medici might not care, as provoking others was his instinct, but as Medici's brother, Lynn, who shared in Medici's glory and downfall to some extent, couldn't just watch him court death. Sigh, he is still too young. Maybe he'll get better when he grows up. Hopefully. Lynn suddenly felt unsure. After all, from the original story, even when Medici became a 3-in-1 hotpot, he never restrained his provocative nature. It wasn't that Medici didn't understand social norms. As a hunter, he was almost naturally adept at them. But while others used high emotional intelligence for socializing, he specialized in using it for provocation. The ancient sun god watched the scene quietly, his smile gentle, making it impossible to guess his thoughts. He continued introducing, "The one dressed in gold is Occasus, a lightseeker of the sun pathway. Though he always seems drunk, he's actually quite reliable. If you encounter any difficulties in daily life, you can ask him for help." "Hello. Welcome to our group. I didn't expect to see newcomers so soon, especially two adorable little angels." Occasus smiled. His smile was clean and bright, easily gaining others' favor. "Hello, Mr. Occasus. Medici and I are also delighted to join you," Lynn responded with a smile. Medici pursed his lips without speaking. As a hunter extremely sensitive to emotions, he could sense that Occasus wasn't as sincere and friendly as he appeared. However, he heeded Lynn's words and didn't attempt to make any sarcastic remarks. The ancient sun god continued, "The silver-haired one is Ouroboros, a soothsayer of the Wheel of Fortune pathway. Ouroboros is rather introverted and not very sociable, but he's not cold-hearted. You'll understand after spending some time with him." "Hello," Ouroboros greeted. His silver eyes looked at the two, pausing for a few seconds as if deep in thought. Several seconds later, he asked, "Do you need me to bestow luck upon you?" As a sequence with not very strong combat abilities, Ouroboros often handled various support tasks, such as premonition, luck blessing, or bad luck cursing. So, in Ouroboros's view, bestowing luck was a way to show goodwill. "Thank you, Mr. Ouroboros. If needed, I'll seek your help in this area." Hearing this, Lynn's smile became more genuine. He could see what Medici saw, so he knew that among the three angels present, the most genuinely welcoming one was the seemingly dull Ouroboros. But this was normal. In social interactions, it's rare to see someone being completely sincere at first meeting. Falseness and politeness are often the main themes of social interactions. Lynn, who had spent a long time with the thousand-faced witch, was very adept at this. "Where's Saucereer?" the ancient sun god asked, remembering something after all the introductions. Dark Angel Saucereer, the avatar created by the ancient sun god using his ribs and two dark angel characteristics, was the first angel king beside the ancient sun god. Unlike conventional avatars, Saucereer, being a firewall created to resist original creator's contamination, maintained a degree of independence. This made him similar to the Dragon of Nightmares Alzuhad and the Dragon of Imagination Anquelt. As long as the ancient sun god didn't actively recall or activate him, Saucereer would remain Saucereer. Therefore, the ancient sun god couldn't always be aware of Saucereer's whereabouts. Saucereer seems to be handling some official duties. Ouroboros thought for a few seconds and said, "I remember he was settling people rescued from the war with the elves before." "Seems so. Saucereer asked me for help earlier, but I didn't understand those things, only how to fight," so I refused. Leodoro scratched his head, recalling something. No wonder I haven't seen him for a few days. I helped with some tasks, but Saucereer didn't seem satisfied with my work, so he stopped asking me for help. Akasis shrugged, his smile still bright. Hearing his colleague's words, Ouroboros looked puzzled. Saucereer didn't ask me for help. That's probably because he didn't think you'd be of any help. Lynn instinctively thought. He realized that these three angels were reliable in combat or as support, but not in handling official duties. Poor Saucereer, what a classic scene of Saucereer at work. The ancient sun god's conscience didn't seem to be troubled. After learning that his avatar was working overtime, he calmly nodded and said to Lynn and Medici. I'll take you to meet Saucereer later. He is my most trusted lieutenant and will take care of and teach you. You are still too young and have much to learn. Wow, what a ruthless body. Lynn feigned an exclamation in his heart. He knew the ancient sun god's main reason for doing this was to keep an eye on him through the avatar. Lynn didn't mind and said with a smile, I already look forward to it. Medici raised an eyebrow, having noticed this as well, but said nothing. Meanwhile, in the city built by the ancient sun god, Saucereer, conducting a field inspection, suddenly felt a slight chill. This made Saucereer frown and instinctively have a bad premonition, though he couldn't pinpoint the source. Was the body going to dump a bunch of work on him again? End of chapter. Author note. Whether Saucereer had an independent personality or not, Cuttlefish never explicitly stated. Here, it's assumed he does. You can also consider this a personal interpretation. It turns out Saucereer's premonition was accurate. Although the ancient sun god did not give Saucereer extra work, he did bring him 2 children. In a way, this was scarier than extra work. No matter how much work there is, it can eventually be completed. But raising children isn't something that can be done overnight. Especially these 2 kids in front of him. One seemed gentle and harmless, but that smile immediately told Saucereer that this was definitely a scheming child. The other one, however, was too much like a hunter, giving Saucereer a headache just by looking at him. But as a qualified tool person and avatar, Saucereer ultimately took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the various stressful scenarios appearing in his mind. He barely managed to smile and said, I understand. I will take good care of them. Please rest assured. I trust you. The ancient sun god nodded. His gentle gaze then swept over the temporary tent-style residences in the distance and asked, how are they doing? He was naturally referring to those whom Saucereer had rescued from the elves, the humans who had been enslaved by the elves. Most are emotionally numb, a few are rather fearful. I arranged for Beyonders of the Moon Pathway to check and treat them. 90% have old injuries, with some severe enough to cause disabilities. All are malnourished. They were probably only barely surviving without starving to death before. I've arranged for druids to urgently produce food. Saucereer quickly entered work mode, reporting methodically. It was clear he had handled such matters before. Quote, Food and medicine are temporarily not an issue, but there is a shortage of proper accommodations. They can't live in temporary tents forever. I believe our city should be expanded outward, but there aren't enough people to build. You know, we are always short of manpower. Additionally, once expanded, the number of patrol personnel needs to increase. This era is too dangerous. Someone must constantly watch to ensure the safety of the civilians in the city, Saucereer continued, his words revealing a persistent lack of people. Furthermore, because these people have long been oppressed by the elves, most have mental issues. I plan to arrange for psychiatrists to provide them with unified comfort and treatment while spreading your faith among them, letting them know of your greatness. This will greatly alleviate their fears. The ancient sun god listened, nodding occasionally. After Saucereer finished, he said, I'll find a way to solve the manpower issue. You can also select some potential talents from these people. We are not short of low-level Beyonder materials. After a pause, the ancient sun god glanced at Lynn and Medici. During the faith promotion, you can include Lynn and Medici. They also need anchor points to stabilize themselves. I will. Saucereer nodded in understanding. After a few more exchanges, the ancient sun god smiled warmly at Lynn and Medici. I have other matters to attend to, so I'll leave you with Saucereer. He will take good care of you. Of course, if he bullies you in private, you can come to me to complain. The last sentence was a joke. Then you must keep your word and not deceive us because we are young, Lynn joked back, shamelessly using a childish tone to act cute. After all, young ones should behave like young ones. Using one's advantages is not shameful. Don't worry, I won't deceive you. The ancient sun god's smile grew warmer. Goodbye. Goodbye. Watching the ancient sun god's departing figure, Lynn finally breathed a sigh of relief. Although it was clear the other party meant no harm, being around such a big shot was still very stressful. Of course, the other party might be just as stressed as him. Lynn thought humorously. Adjusting his expression, he then looked at Saussure. Ads by PubFuture. The dark angel before him had slightly curled shoulder-length black hair and a face too handsome to be human. He wore a long robe of deep black adorned with silver threads, intricate patterns, and luxurious accessories. Just standing there quietly, he gave off a divine aura. No wonder he's the most handsome creation of the ancient sun god. Truly handsome, almost catching up to me. Lynn joked inwardly. Saussure then looked at him, and Lynn immediately put on a harmless smile and asked, "What's the matter, Mr. Saussure? Can you stop smiling so fakely? It's disgusting." Medici interrupted before Saussure could speak, unleashing his trademark sarcasm. This was unsurprising, as Medici had long wanted to be sarcastic. If not for Lynn's constant restraint, he would have already tested Leodoro, Occuses, and Ouroboros with his provocations to gauge their characters and attitudes. Now that the ancient sun god was finally gone, Medici no longer held back, first targeting Lynn, who had kept him in check. Whether or not Medici had his own considerations behind the provocation was something only he knew. Hearing Medici, Lynn's smile remained unchanged. He looked at Saussure seriously and asked, "Mr. Saussure, could I have half a minute?" Saussure looked at Lynn and then at the arrogant Medici. Guessing what Lynn intended, he nodded. "You may." "Thank you," Lynn replied politely. Seeing Lynn's gentle and courteous manner made Saussure feel somewhat relieved. Just as he thought, maybe this kid isn't that hard to handle, he witnessed the two little ones starting to fight right in front of him. Saussure was stunned. He expected Lynn might scold Medici or return the sarcasm, but he never imagined the two would start fighting in front of him. Though the two children were mindful not to use their Beyonder abilities, as someone also skilled in combat, Saussure could tell they weren't just play fighting but were seriously fighting. This left Saussure with a feeling of both amusement and helplessness, realizing that his future with these children would be very eventful. End of chapter. However, this really doesn't make them feel like an outsider. Feeling both amused and helpless, Saussure suddenly experienced a subtle sense of being trusted and relied upon. He finally had the realization that he would be the guardian of these two children. This left him with mixed feelings, but he couldn't help but sigh. Finally, Saussure stepped forward to separate the two children, trying to speak in as gentle a voice as possible. "All right, no more fighting. Brothers shouldn't fight over a single word. Instead of fighting, why don't we discuss something important? For example, what titles should we use when promoting your faith? Do you have any ideas?" Saussure tried to divert the attention of the two children, bringing up the important matter they had previously intended to discuss. Since the Lord hadn't personally designated titles for these two, it was naturally left to them to choose. The two little ones immediately stopped fighting. In the moment they ceased, they exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. It was obvious they had fought intentionally. The purpose of the fight was not only to show Saussure a part of their true selves and test his tolerance but also to express their harmlessness. Whether Saussure believed they were still just children without deep thoughts, or that they didn't see him as an outsider and already considered him their future guardian, were results Lynn and Medici could accept. Although they had never discussed it, their similarly keen natures in dealing with others led them to an unspoken agreement the moment Medici spoke. Of course, besides testing, they also genuinely wanted to fight. Lynn felt the mischievous child deserved a beating, and Medici, as usual, wanted to assert dominance and get revenge for past beatings. It's clear they were meant to be brothers. In response to Saussure's question, Medici immediately said, "Isn't it obvious? I will be the angel of war." Lynn, after thinking for a second, said, "For me, call me the angel of secrets." Mystery prior represents knowledge and mystery, and secret inherently implies knowledge and secrecy. It can even extend to mean secret, confidential, similar to the hermit. Lynn felt that, as someone who aims to become a hermit, the title Angel of Secrets was quite fitting. Hearing this, Saucereer glanced at the two little ones, clearly understanding the ambitions these titles represented. But having ambitions and aspirations is a good thing. Lynn and Medici's pathways didn't have conflicts like those of Leodoro and the others, so Saucereer just noted these titles down, saying, "I will have Ouroboros create appropriate backgrounds for you. If you have your own ideas, feel free to share them. Initially, your followers may not be many, but don't worry. Once you join the Lord in a few battles and have your own deeds, this will no longer be an issue." After settling the matter of faith, Saucereer thought of something else and asked, "Did the Lord mention where you will live?" Lynn and Medici exchanged glances and then shook their heads in unison, saying, "No." "I figured as much." Saucereer found himself unsurprised, realizing that besides bringing these two over, the Lord likely didn't arrange anything else. He sighed and said, "In that case, you two will live with me from now on. Once I finish handling things here, I'll take you to familiarize yourselves with your new home and get you any living supplies you need." Saucereer is really a good guardian. In the fifth epic, Loan Kingdom, Tingen City, Lynn opened his eyes and couldn't help but remark. Ads by PubFuture. Just now, he and Medici had been settled into their accommodations by Saucereer in the second epic. This newly appointed guardian was clearly meticulous and considerate, arranging their clothing, food, and shelter very well. He even arranged their education and courses based on their personalities and pathways. For instance, Medici would practice daily with Saucereer to better utilize his combat abilities, while Lynn received a room full of books to study. No wonder the ancient sun god relies so heavily on his avatar. If I had an avatar like Saucereer, I'd delegate everything to him too. Lynn thought, echoing the sentiment of a shrewd deity, then looked at the self-standing quill beside him, his expression becoming peculiar. He had originally seized 008 to solve his divinity overflow issue. But due to the sudden attack of the Dragon of Nightmares, the current second epic found Lynn not only obtaining the Dragon of Nightmares, Alzuhad's characteristics, but also successfully infiltrating the ancient sun god's entourage. Although Lynn knew the ancient sun god kept them close primarily for supervision, he couldn't deny that his first avatar's divinity problem was essentially solved. This left Lynn feeling both amused and relieved, though he didn't think seizing 008 was in vain. After all, even without needing it to solve divinity overflow issues, 008, as a Sequence 1 sealed artifact of the Spectator pathway, was a powerful tool. It was definitely something useful in the future. Moreover, while the divinity overflow problem was solved for the first avatar during normal activities, it still needed consideration during his cheat mode. This residual divine corruption, even though weakened due to the stability of the first avatar, still existed. Having 008 at hand would always be a timely solution. Yes, double the 008, double the treatment, double the joy. Lynn mused while looking at 008 with a curious gaze. In the original timeline, 008 appeared at the end of the second epic. But in the timeline he influenced, the Dragon of Nightmares, Alzuhad, was prematurely provoked and turned into a quill. So, was the 008 before him the former or the latter? Based on 008's previous behavior, it seemed to be the former. But who could guarantee that what he did in the past didn't affect the current future? "You can sense what I'm thinking," Lynn said with a smile, not minding that 008 might grasp part of his secrets. After all, it was inevitable, so, can you tell me, what's your answer? The quill trembled slightly, not in a natural writing motion but more like a shiver. It then wrote on the paper, "I have no memory from before becoming a sealed artifact." End of chapter. I don't have any memories from before I became a sealed artifact. Unlike before, the quill's attitude now was noticeably more serious, no longer treating everyone like characters in a play. "Do you know when you were born?" Lynn asked, noting the quill's sudden obedience with a hint of understanding. "I'm not sure. It seems I appeared at the end of the second epic, but it also feels like I existed long before." "You've seen me, haven't you?" Lynn continued calmly. In the next moment, he saw the quill write a few words. Yes, I have seen you. But I don't have any further memories of you. Who exactly are you? Funny, that's a question I want to know the answer to as well. Lynn shrugged, his tone slightly self-deprecating but completely genuine. He wanted to know who or what he really was more than anyone else. But regardless of who I am, that doesn't affect our cooperation, does it? Lynn said, smiling. The quill hesitated for a moment but did not argue. Whether it was conceding to Lynn's point or having its own plans was unclear. Lynn didn't care about the silent quill, his mind inevitably starting to analyze its earlier words. Although there were only a few sentences, they carried a lot of information, confirming some of Lynn's suspicions. His Smurf account likely existed in the past. As bizarre as it sounded, his account in the past and his current existence seemed to be synchronized. This concept was complex. To simplify, actions his Smurf account took in the past would affect the present. For example, 008 had no special reaction to him before, but after he killed the Dragon of Nightmares, Alzuhad, in the second epic, it had related memories. Additionally, 008 didn't seem to lose its unaltered past memories. Its past seemed to have two distinct outcomes, one already determined, the other shrouded in mystery, awaiting Lynn's future actions. This is quite an astonishing result. Lynn sighed, though he wasn't too surprised. Having experienced being a big shot, he felt nothing happening to him could shock him anymore. Lynn pondered some key questions. Setting aside how this parallel past and present works, does my altered past affect only memories or actual events as well? Or does it exist in a bizarre superposition state, both altered and unaltered? If I save someone in the second epic who was supposed to die, will that person revive in the present where my main body resides? If they do revive, how would the resulting butterfly effect be calculated? Does history have an adaptive quality, continuing as it would aside from my interference? Or perhaps, like in the Avengers Endgame, the revived person appears in the current timeline. How will the affected individuals view these divergent pasts? Will they acknowledge both as real or see one as an illusion? Lynn thought these were all crucial questions. To answer them, more examples and interactions with relevant individuals were needed, such as ads by PubFuture. The 3-in-1 hotpot still hiding in the underground structure once belonging to the Blood Emperor Alista, Red Angel Medici. As Lynn's Smurf account's brother, Medici's fate had definitely been altered by Lynn. But although Medici and I are brothers, we don't have the best relationship. Maybe I should build some rapport in the second epic first. Once our relationship is good enough, I can meet the Medici of this timeline to check his condition and attitude. Lynn decided internally. He wasn't in a rush to solve these complex temporal issues since there was nothing he urgently wanted to change in the past. And any significant changes he might want to make were far in the future, as his Smurf account was currently in the second epic, far from key historical events. Instead of fretting over this complex time issue, Lynn stretched and decided to focus on his immediate plans. As for his Smurf account, it was clear he would continue following the ancient sun god, building more anchors to rid himself of the divine influence. Acquiring blood from other angels to read their information and create corresponding spells would be a bonus. For his main body, Lynn planned to stay in Tingen for a few days to see what the Evernight goddess had in store for Klein, then return to Backlund to avenge former Lynn Soto's death, ascend to melee scholar, and perhaps find a way into the Tarot Club. Firstly, as a reader of the Lordofthemysteries, Lynn was genuinely interested in meeting characters like Miss Justice and the Hanged Man Alger. For someone who had never ventured outside, these characters were like his real friends, and he naturally wanted to get to know them. Secondly, Lynn needed the Tarot Club as a channel. The valuable information on the second, third, and fourth epics and the resources and backgrounds of its members were highly valuable to him. For example, he could purchase information on the late second epic from Little Sun. Even rough accounts could serve as prophetic information, potentially being very useful for his Smurf account in the second epic. But first, I need to make money, Lynn thought, considering his remaining £800 and the cost of subsequent potion materials. Maybe he could get to know Justice and sell her some spectator pathway potion formulas. It's worth noting that during his fight with the Dragon of Nightmares, Alzuhad, Lynn had read all the information about the spectator pathway while in a unique state. Combined with what he knew from the original storyline, Lynn now possessed complete knowledge of 2 divine pathways, though aside from making money, this knowledge didn't seem to have much immediate use for him. End of chapter.